Okay, so I got through all the notes, and I think I need to go through the notes, but of course, you're also very interested in current affairs, and I'm interested in current affairs, and yet another mass shooting in the United States in Texas that killed 21 people, including 19 children. That comes a week or 10 days after another mass killing in Buffalo by a racist, killing 10 people in Buffalo, New York, 10 Black people in Buffalo, New York. America's got over 400 million guns floating around the United States, over 400 million in a country of 330 million. There are guns everywhere in the United States. America has had a number of mass shootings since the beginning of the year. And the claim is made repeatedly that this is an American phenomenon, that this is something that's unique to the United States. Why can't the supposedly most developed, most powerful democracy in the world deal with this problem? Is it a problem? And of course, the answers to these questions are deep questions that go beyond, the outcome of particular elections. But I think, it goes back to some concepts and ideas we talked about in this class earlier regarding what's called American exceptionalism. So I'll open up the lesson plan for this this class that I had open already, and just to show you the material that I've always been posting on the cyber campus, right? This quote from, oh, this is the wrong one, sorry. Let me go back to the other class. And yeah, there it is. Okay, this is share the screen. So yeah, this quotation of American exceptionalism. The American creed is something of a double-edged sword. It fosters a high sense of personal responsibility, independent initiative, and volunteerism, even as it also encourages self-serving behavior, atomism, and a disregard for the communal good, including public health. In terms of the relatively poor behavior in the United States in dealing with the pandemic, you look for the answers here, including, for example, in the structure of American institutions that emerged around these Congregationalist Protestant radicals rejecting the aristocratic states of Europe that justified their rule under the king because they knew best for you as a subject of the king how to make sure you should worship God and make sure you go to heaven rather than go to hell. And so this deep suspicion of powerful central government that I don't think is emphasized by this person enough has its roots also in slavery. I mean, the United States is a country whose economy was really unlike the economy of, say, Canada or Australia, really relied as a British colony on slavery to grow tobacco and cotton in the early industrialization period. And that mindset that emerged, that these are human beings, but we have the right to control them, and nobody should be able to interfere with us, including outsiders like the national federal government must not interfere in our internal affairs, is something that's institutionalized deeply in American political culture. So, as I told you, people who are strong Trump reporters, of course they deny that they're racist. They point to Herschel Walker. They point to Clarence Thomas. They point to other Black politicians that they elect and choose and support. And they say, as long as they support American exceptionalism that is, as Seymour Martin Lipset describes it, as early classical liberalism, right? That the government emphasizes laissez-faire, minimal government regulation of the economy, liberty, non-government intervention in society by the government, even if that intervention is necessary to stop Jim Crow. That's wrong. And people become unhappy about that. Egalitarianism, that we're all equal, supposedly equality of opportunity, respect. And individualism, you set your own standards for happiness, and populism. And the point I'm trying to make here democratic participation in government. Remember, that's what populism involves. I mean, like I said, there's going to be, well, 3 elections in Ohio. There's 3 elections every year that I can participate in. And the outcome, even if only 15% or 20% of voters vote, the outcomes are binding. But the point I want to emphasize is that I think a lot of this is also based upon an American foundation of what we called earlier in a class settler colonialism, that justifying and reinforcing an economic and political system that heavily relied upon exploitation of non-white people, and making sure that your economic interests are protected, that you've invested so much of your material resources and identity into that system, and having to come up with a justification. As I said earlier, like in other classes, it's human nature for Homo sapiens to engage in what's called motivated reasoning. My motivations, even if I don't know what they are shaping my perception of the world, even if I don't realize it. Specifically, my perceptions of your motivations. I have to make some kind of assumptions about what is driving you. No matter how much or how little information I have about you, I still have to make some assumption or explicit determination of what you are. And that means what you can do and what you want. It might be wrong, it might be right, but I always do it. And the point is that my needs and my drives, including security, prosperity, esteem, self-esteem, I want to feel good about myself. And if I benefit from this system of slavery, I want to feel good about the system of slavery because it's who I am. And I will come up with justifications for it. Particularly I'll talk about religion, that we are bringing Christianity to these godless heathens. It's our manifest destiny to civilize this continent. That's the term we used in the 19th century. God wants us to do this. God wants us to civilize this territory. And those Africans, hey, they sold them to us. We didn't kidnap them. They sold them to us, and we are uplifting them through bringing them to America. And I don't want the federal government interfering with what I do with my property. And my property includes my slaves. And so how does this manifest itself? It goes beyond people being explicitly racist. That's not what I'm saying, right? So for example, let's compare United States and Australia. He also makes that point, again, to repeat a point I made earlier in another class, that there were 2 countries born as a result of the American Revolution, not 1, 2. And one was Canada, and the other is the United States. But Canada's the other one, and Canada became the homeland for British conservatism in North America, whereas the United States became the homeland of radical liberalism. And he makes that point in this book, right? In terms of how, while populist forces have consistently won the United States since its founding, Canada has been the site of the political victory of conservative British forces in North America. Because of the strength of British Tory conservatism in Canada, statism in the form of paternalistic socialism, which is social democracy, is accepted in Canada. Whereas in the US, the sources of populism and egalitarianism won, but not for Black people. The American Revolution, the War Hawks of 1820, the Jacksonian period, the Civil War. In Canada, the conservative forces prevailed in the American Revolution. Canada did not join, despite America encouraging Canada to join. The War of 1812 that defeated the American attempt to annex Canada, the Mackenzie-Papineau Rebellion of the 1830s, and the founding of the Dominion of Canada in 1867. So American moralism is evident in the public political controversies over gay rights and abortion, which are linked to religion, and they are non-issues in the rest of the industrialized developed democracies. Abortion service clinics are burned and doctors murdered in the United States, but not anywhere else. So how does this manifest itself, for example, in the pandemic? Here's a report highlighting the the comparative performance of Australia and the United States. Now, of course, the point here is, of course, Australia has much fewer people, but in terms of the per capita death rate, per person death rate, is much higher in Australia, in the United States than in Australia, right? If the United States had the same COVID death rate as Australia, about 900,000 lives would have been saved. So over 1 million people have died in the United States from COVID-19. If the United States had the same death rate as Australia, 1/10 of those people would have died. How do you explain that difference? So what went right in Australia and wrong in the United States? It looks obvious. Australia restricted travel and personal interaction until vaccinations were widely available, then maximize vaccine uptake, prioritizing people who were most vulnerable before gradually opening up the country again. But Australia's COVID playbook, remember, this is a developed country, this is a wealthy country, this is an English-speaking country. How do you explain the difference? And the difference is, of course, American culture is different from Australian culture. And it's manifested in its institutions. I mean, Australian government is federal, but it's not like the US federal system. There's not separation of powers. The prime minister controls the legislature in these states and at the federal government level in Australia. But Australia's COVID playbook produced results because of something more easily felt than analyzed at a news conference. Dozens of interviews, along with survey data and scientific studies from around the world, point to a life-saving trait that Australians displayed from the top of government to the hospital floor, and the Americans have shown they lack: trust in science, in institutions, but especially in one another. When the pandemic began, 76% of Australians said they trusted the healthcare system, compared with 34% of Americans. And 93% of Australians reported being able to get support in times of crisis for people living outside their neighborhood. In global surveys, Australians were more likely than Americans to agree that most people can be trusted, a major factor researchers found in getting people to change their behavior for the common good to combat COVID. But of greater import, interpersonal trust, a belief that others would do what was right, not just for the individual, but for the community, to save lives. Americans, they don't think, they don't care about other people. Trust mattered more than the smoking prevalence, health spending, or form of government. A study of 177 countries in the Lancet recently found. The Lancet is a British academic medical journal. That was trust. That was the most important factor in determining the COVID response and its effectiveness. So we'll come back to that later. And then this report. So what explains this breakdown in trust? And it appears to be a backlash against the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Right. In the US, the backlash to civil rights era made guns a political third rail, and it goes on to highlight that fatal American exceptionalism. The United States is different. Recent years have brought many mass shootings, including those of school children in Newton, Connecticut, 11 years ago, Parkland, Florida, but essentially no new gun control legislation. Like so many other things about modern American politics, the reasons are rooted in the political backlash to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, particularly to desegregation of the races, to desegregation of the school system. The modern quest for gun control and gun rights movement it triggered were born in the shadow of Brown versus Board of Education, right? And Reva Siegel, a constitutional scholar at Yale Law School, wrote in a 2008 article in a Harvard Law Review. She was referring to Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, the landmark Supreme Court ruling in 1924. Directly and indirectly, conflicts over civil rights have shaped modern understandings of the Second Amendment. Desegregation sparked a reactionary backlash among white voters, particularly in the South, who saw it as overreach by the Supreme Court and federal government. The government must not be intervening in our local affairs. That backlash, with the help of conservative political strategists, coalesced into a multi-issue political movement. Promises to protect the traditional family from the perceived threat of feminism drew in white women. And influential conservative lawyers framed the Second Amendment as a source of individual counter rights that conservatives could seek protection for in the courts, a counterbalance to progressive rights groups' litigation on segregation and other issues. that gun control turned into a highly salient political issue for American conservatives in a way that sets the United States apart from other wealthy nations. The gun control laws in the United Kingdom, Australia, and Norway were all passed by conservative governments. Although they faced some opposition to the new measures, particularly from hunters groups, it did not line up with a broader political movement the way gun rights did in the United States. So I mean, the roots have to be found in settler colonialism. I mean, Australia and Canada did not, I mean, they had their abuse of indigenous peoples, but they did not have institutionalized slavery. So in the time remaining, of course, I know we're running out of time here, and I wanted to do any time remaining here. Well, time's up. So I guess we'll have to stop today. And we'll have a debate with Cyril on Wednesday. Okay, bye.